So, welcome everyone. Good morning and welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. It's lovely to have you all here again this morning. There's a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces, I'm sure, that will be coming through this morning. This is the final session of our Career and Resume Workshop series. And today's session is a resume masterclass, as I was just saying to Tanaz. It's the cruncher. This is what we have to get right when we're looking for work. So I will introduce Tanaz Byramji to you, an experienced career development practitioner. Tanaz has over 10 years' experience providing high-impact career coaching and practical support to help people achieve their career goals. She's worked with clients from a wide range of industries and professions, assisting them with identifying career goals, finding new jobs, negotiating a promotion, returning to work after career breaks. She's also provided advice from different education and training options and helps people navigate new types of work such as contracting, consulting, and even setting up their own business. And certainly over these last 3 sessions, we've had a real taste of all that is involved in the whole gamut of looking for work, and very complex, but Tanaz has been steering us in the right direction. So I'll hand it over to you, Tanaz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josephine. It's lovely to see some familiar faces from the last 2 sessions and hopefully some new ones as well. As Josephine said, I'm happy to take questions at the end of the session, or if you pop them into the chat, Josephine will interrupt if there's a spot to do so. But rest assured, we'll try and get to everyone if necessary. So welcome to the last of our 3 career and resume workshops. Thank you to Brimbank Libraries for funding these. As Josephine said, I'm Tanaz and I run Successful Resumes and Career Results, which are 2 consultancies. And in that time, I've spent the last 10 years writing resumes for my clients. That's thousands and thousands of resumes and cover letters and criteria responses and LinkedIn profiles. So as I was saying to Josephine, this is something I can probably do in my sleep. But if I miss anything, please don't feel free to jump in and ask me. Let's get started. So those of you who have been in a previous workshop will be familiar with this slide. There's lots and lots of different processes and elements to your job application, but your resume, it's the foundation of all of them. Whatever your job or industry, you need to invest time and resources in creating an effective resume. I suggest at this point, accept that it's complicated, accept it's going to be time consuming, and be prepared. If you get this right, everything else should flow through. Your resume is a functional document. It's not just your career history, and it's a bit of a process. So I always recommend that you start by creating what I call a master CV. That will capture every possible relevant piece of information. And then you continue to add to this every 6 to 12 months. This isn't something you should ideally be leaving to the point where you need to apply for a new role. I know it's very easy to say that, and it's such a time-consuming process. People will apply for jobs and send out thousands or hundreds of documents, and then once they get it, they're like, that's it. I'm going to focus on my job, and that's all I'm going to do, and I don't need to worry about this horrendous piece of work again until I need to do it 4 or 5 years later or 4 or 5 months later. Don't do that. Don't let it sit. Keep adding to it. Your resume should be a shorter version of your master CV. The resume is the one that needs to be tailored to the types of roles you're targeting. Hiring managers and recruiters are looking for information in that resume that is relevant to the roles that you're applying for. That will change depending on the type of role. Make the process as simple as possible for your potential employer by approaching your resume like an interview. Consider, when you're looking at what you need to put into it, consider what is it that they need to know to make a hiring decision. Consider also this, it's a worthwhile investment of time because once you've got that master CV, you create your customized resumes and your LinkedIn profile from that same master document. You can then also take that master document once you're in a role to your performance evaluations because you've hopefully been continuing to add to it over time. You can use it to demonstrate your achievements and remind the people who employ you, oh yeah, you did do that and that's how you did it and that was the outcome. And really that's quite important if you want to consider career progression, promotion, pay rises, or even just a pat on the back, quite frankly. So let's continue. Think about what a hiring manager or a recruiter would ask. They want to know what you've done, your experience, where you've done it, how you did it, what the outcome was, what skills you used, what you know, and what you can do. They need to know how are you different from and better than other applicants. Essentially, how do you stand out from the crowd? Essentially, this comes under 5 key areas: your experience, your knowledge, your skills, your capabilities. That's what you can do and the thing that people forget to put into their resumes. And then your qualifications and credentials, which is everything from a short course through to a bachelor's or a master's degree. Hiring managers and recruiters want to know, can you do the job they need you to do? Do you have the necessary skills and knowledge? Have you done it before? And are you the type of person they or their team would want to work with? A recruiter is a slightly different proposition. They take it a step further. They want to know how to best sell you to their client. To be successful, your resume needs to demonstrate that you understand and anticipate their needs. So here's your key considerations. And I apologize if I'm going too fast. I will go back and cover anything that I've been light on or that you've got questions about. This is what your resume needs to be as a document. We've talked about the content, and I'll go through each of those steps individually in greater detail. But you must make sure that your resume is optimized for ATS. Now, ATS is applicant tracking systems. ATS is a piece of software that scans your resume and your cover letter and relates it back to the position description for any job that you're applying for, particularly if you're applying for an online role or a role that is advertised online. It works, the best way to describe it is it works similar to Google. Google runs an algorithm using search phrases and terms to bring up the most relevant information to you when you send to Google a query. ATS is slightly different, but it still runs by an algorithm. The query or the information that's put in is put in by the hiring manager or the recruiter. Let's say that goes into one side of the system. You've got your job advertisement, your position description, any other data or information that HR or the recruiter or the direct hiring manager or line manager considers relevant for the role. These are all the things we need for an applicant to have. Your resume goes into the other side, another pile, and it goes in with every other application. And look, at the moment, we're told that your average administration role gets anywhere between 300 and 700 applications. That's a huge number. So what ATS does is it shrinks it down. It picks out the top 20% most relevant applications, and they need to be optimized. They're the ones that are optimized for ATS. So the algorithm runs and it says, all right, this person has everything that we require. They've provided the information in a way that we understand, in a way that is relevant to the position description and the other data that's been fed in. This is the closest match. We'll take the top 20%, and that's what a human being will look at. The next slide will tell us more about how we actually optimize our CV for ATS. The other considerations are your resume needs to include information that is relevant to your target roles, the most important information. It needs to be neatly formatted and grammatically correct. To make sure your resume is grammatically correct, read it over. Once you finish writing it, put it aside. Come back to it an hour later, 2 hours later, the next day if you can, and then read it with fresh eyes. Read it out loud, because reading it out loud will help you determine if you've got the punctuation correct, if you've used the right tense. For example, you might list for one role that you utilized strong communication skills, you negotiated contracts, you managed a team of staff. And in the next role, you might have forgotten the tense usage and you're using current tense, managing staff, utilizing communication skills. And those action words, they're the pinnacle or the starting point and the foundation for each statement in your resume. Make sure the tense usage is correct and standard the whole way through, which leads to being grammatically correct and having consistent style and grammar. It's one thing for your grammar to be correct, your punctuation in the right space, etc., but you also need to make it consistent throughout the document. If you're going to put a bullet point, a dot point, a period at the end of a bullet point, do it at the end of every bullet point, or don't do it at all. Your formatting needs to be neat and contemporary. It needs to have standardized margins. It needs to have a reasonable amount of white space, that space with no words crammed in. The lines need to be the same width apart right through. So if you're going to hit an enter keystroke after your heading or your subheading, do it after every heading and subheading. Make it consistent, make it pleasing to the eye and easy to read. Don't justify. So that means spreading out the words so that it all runs in a column like this. Railway tracks, there is another phrase that's used for that. Keep it all left-hand justified, which means all straight against one margin, but you can have the lines of different lengths, ending at different lengths. There's a reason for that. It actually improves someone's ability to comprehend or understand the information that's provided in a resume. Use ideally sans serif font. So anything without those little ends on the end of it, don't use fancy fonts at all. Stick with something that is quite simple. Arial, Helvetica, Calibri, those tend to be the most commonly used ones. If you are using a serif font like Times New Roman, you want to make sure that that is no less than 12 points size-wise. You can get away with 10 or 11 if you use a sans serif font. You need to make sure that your resume is an appropriate length. Don't make it 8 pages, but probably don't make it 1 page either. A 1-page CV is very much an American concept. We don't really do that here. Generally, our CVs are around about the three-page mark. If you're a graduate, it's probably 2 pages. So you probably don't have a lot of experience or work experience. If you are an experienced executive, it could be 4 pages, or even as someone with 20 years of experience in a particular role. So you might be a nurse and have been a nurse for the last 20 years, but you will probably need 3 to 4 pages to express that, even if you've only had 2 roles in that time period. You please make sure that you've got the correct essential details, okay? That's your name, your address, your phone number. You don't have to put your postal address, but it is a good idea to put your suburb and your state. And make sure that your email address is appropriate. So please don't have cooldudesam@hotmail.com. Make it something that is ideally a derivative of your name, using a Gmail or an Outlook account if possible. Another consideration, you don't need a headshot. In Australia, headshots are not often used. That's what your LinkedIn profile is for. So keep your headshot for your LinkedIn profile, unless you're in an industry or an organization or an occupation that really requires a headshot. Very often models, creatives, actors, anyone in the media industry, they will often put a headshot on. That is a convention that's specific to their industry. It is different if you're applying for international roles. Then consider all the specifics that need to be in the CV. Make sure that whatever you're writing about, whether it's employment history or your qualifications, your volunteer work, whatever you have done, you need to provide specifics around that. What's the title of what you did? Where did you do it? So what's the organization, the institution, and what's the relevant date that applies to that? And I'll show you what that looks like later. Let's talk about ATS. Applicants apply online nearly 95% of the time, and in over 75% of cases, the applications will be entered into what's called ATS. ATS is the first dead end you need to navigate in what's often a maze of process for the job applications. ATS is essentially a system or a piece of software that's used to capture, sort, and shortlist all the applications for a role, and it's nearly always used when you apply for a job online. As I said before, here's what happens. The employer or recruiter inputs all the information from the PD for the role, and that's cross-referenced with all the applications. The applications that match the accountabilities and criteria for the role most closely are ranked in order of suitability, and that creates a shortlist. The recruiter or HR manager will then read the shortlisted applications. Now, that information can't just be a whole stack of keywords. 10 years ago, you could put in a table with all keywords. Might have communication skills, negotiation. If you're a trade, it might be power tools, manual tools. It might be, if you're in construction, it might be OHS compliance, just simple singular keywords. If it's retail, it might be customer service, conflict resolution. Now, ATS is a lot more sophisticated. They're looking for keywords in context. You can't just put in a table. In fact, you shouldn't put in tables at all, because ATS doesn't like tables. It doesn't like images. It doesn't like graphs. It doesn't like any pictures of any sort. You put it in and it will often put the information out of order, which means it basically breaks the system and makes it much harder for ATS to be likely to list you and rank you highly in the process. So considering that, you don't put your table of skills in. Instead, you make sure that those keywords are included in examples from your experience. Or if you're going to have skills and dot point them, make sure it's a whole sentence. Uses well-developed communication skills to liaise with customers in a retail environment. You could put that down, or in a busy retail environment. Don't just put communication skills and customer service delivery. That's what keywords and context means. The other consideration is to use color sparingly. Only use it as a highlight and choose it from within Word. There's something called a web safe palette. So when you go to your Word, and you really should be writing your resume in Word, please. When you go to your color options, go into the advanced color options. There'll be a color wheel, there'll be a graph. There's all sorts of different ways to pick your colors. There's a set of crayons. Those crayons currently are the web safe colors. Pick your colors from out there. That means that no matter what platform, format, or piece of software is used to open and view your resume, that color will appear the same. If you pick a really interesting shade of blue that isn't a web safe shade, it might appear yellow when someone opens it in, for example, Pages instead of Word. Similarly, as I said, use a common font that's clear and professional. Calibri, Arial, Helvetica, and Times New Roman are good choices. Use tabs and spaces to lay out information neatly rather than tables. And when you're using tabs, include a space. So that if the tab space gets stripped out of formatting, the information doesn't all run together. In fact, keep tables to a minimum. And when they are used, ensure it's only to 2 columns. And whatever you do, do not use a Word template that has your entire resume within a table. Really not ATS compliant. Make sure that your contact details are in the body of the document on the first page, not just in the header or the footer. Some ATS are sophisticated enough to read the headers and footers, some are not. And you've got to sort of cater most broadly to the widest range of ATS systems out there. Make sure you include page numbers. Don't include clip art or word art. Try not to use any complex formatting or design concepts, including watermarks and fancy borders. Ensure there's adequate white space. Keep your headings in uppercase letters because that differentiates them from the body of text. And use a standard hierarchy so that it's clear what's a heading, what's a subheading, and what's your body of text. Use full sentences where possible and ensure all your bullet points are correctly aligned. Now, I've given you all of that information, and there's a caveat to it. If you want to have a beautifully designed resume, in fact, I was just speaking with someone who's very, very skilled at resume development, probably an industry leader. And their recommendation is that you can have beautifully designed, fancy looking resumes that you do in Canva or you create from a lovely template on Word, but then make sure you have an ATS compliant version as well, that is stripped out of all of that formatting and just is a neat and simple document. You can then apply with both versions of your resume, and in the title, in the name of the document, you can write ATS compliant or in the simpler version. The other way you can do that is that you can, and then make sure when you do that in your cover letter, where there's usually a standard phrase, please find attached my resume in support of this application. I have also included an ATS friendly version for your consideration. It does mean that they'll probably put both the resumes through the system if it's done automatically. It just means one probably won't be formatted correctly and might go into the too hard pile and won't be ranked highly, and one will. So that's one way you can get around it. It's also really great if you're going to see recruiters. You have your beautiful version and you have the standard version that you use to submit for an application. One of the things you can do then is if you're applying for a role, you can apply online using your ATS friendly version. Then you can pick up the phone, call the recruiter and say, I've just applied for this role. However, I've applied using an ATS friendly resume. I've also attached my master version here, or I've attached you can use whatever you want, a final version or another version, or you can just say you've just attached it. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to point out that it's the pretty version. You can just add it to the attachment. It means that there is a chance that a human being will see your nicely presented one. You can also take that visual fancy document to an interview with you. Really great if you're in a creative industry as well. You can also upload that visual graphically professional fancy version, whatever you want to call it, to your LinkedIn profile as a PDF. There's an option in your summary to upload documents and media upload that version there as well. So it will get seen if that's what you want to do. Moving right along, let's talk about resume content. Oh, there's a lot to include, but really this is what your resume needs to have. It needs to, one, articulate your value proposition. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. That needs to go right at the top. Then it needs to provide a brief overview of where you're at, a career summary or a goal. It doesn't need to be very long, and you don't have to say, I want to, I've been a marketing coordinator for the last 5 years and I want to be a marketing manager. You don't have to be quite so specific, but sometimes an overview or a profile is a short 3-sentence statement that at least gives an indication of where you're at, and can often be used to explain things that aren't clear, such as a career break, or a return to work, or a change in career direction, or if you are looking for progression. That's followed by your employment history. That's just a summary, date, title, where you worked. Then you've got your list of skills, knowledge, and capabilities. And then you provide evidence of that using your experience. And that's where you break out your roles into responsibilities and achievements. And those responsibilities and achievements should reference the skills, knowledge, and capabilities that you say you have. Then you list out your qualifications, your education, relevant certificates, licenses, tickets, if that's appropriate. Make sure you include memberships to any professional associations and industry organizations. Summarize your community involvement. So that's any volunteer work, if you're on the Parents and Friends Committee, even particularly if you don't have a lot of content or you don't have any recent experience. I work with a lot of mums returning to work. Most of them have been involved with playgroups. They've been involved with their local kinder. They've helped run a fete stall. They've usually done something in that time. They might have organized a community event for a cultural association they're part of. If they've done something like that, it can go into your community involvement section. And then you reference your referees. There was a question about referees that was sent through previously. Thank you, Caroline. We will get to that one. And we'll get to that slide. I'll tell you how you reference your referees and how you brief them, etc. Let's talk about the first point. Your unique value proposition is otherwise known as your point of difference. It's a combination of skills, experience, knowledge, capabilities, and personal attributes that make you the best fit for the roles you're applying for. What that means is, at the top of your resume, you would like to have a headline statement that sits under your name that is basically, it says what you are, who you are, and why you do it better than anyone else. What I coach clients to do is consider if you're going to walk into an interview room. There's 3 other people sitting outside. You've all got 5 years of experience in the particular role you're applying for. You're all a similar age, and you've got similar qualifications. If you take those 3 things into account and you're walking in and you have to convince that person that you're the best candidate, what are you going to tell them about yourself that will make sure that you demonstrate your value, that you demonstrate why you're the best person for that role? So I tell clients out loud, say to yourself, this is what I do better. We all do this. Everyone does it. Every other, if there's 200 applicants, at least 120 of them can do the job that's out there. At least 100 of those have done it before. So then how do you differentiate yourself? It's okay in that headline statement to bring in some of those personal attributes. If you've got a strong work ethic, if you're particularly good at balancing competing priorities, use your background to inform your headline statement. So if you've had lots of contract roles, you might consider that something that doesn't work in your favor, a negative. It doesn't have to be. Turn it into a positive and actually incorporate it in your headline statement, which is usually about 3 lines or 1.5 sentences, if you like. So it's a slightly longer sentence than is ideal, but it works quite well in that space. And you might tell them that you've got, a portfolio career in design and branding, for example, if you're a graphic designer, which has allowed you to gain diversity of perspective. It's allowed you to gain far greater experience than you would in an agency environment. It's allowed you to develop really strong client engagement skills. Think about what's valuable to the role. Think about what you will do better. Again, it's not going to be, everyone has the ability to say this stuff. The difference here is not everyone remembers to do it on their resume. So have that up the top. Often what that does is it forms what we call the basis of your 30-second elevator pitch. The idea is that when you finally get a recruiter on the phone, and that can be a challenge in and of itself, what's the one message you need to get across to them about who you are and what you have to offer? That's got to form the pinnacle of everything. That messaging has to go through and flow through to your interview as well. So if you don't spend time on anything else, spend time on this, figuring out what the value is that you bring to an organization or an employer. So this is what a headline statement looks like. This is where, as I said, you identify your value proposition. You can support that with 3 following statements. So 3 bullet points. In those 3 bullet points, basically, there's 3 different ways if you can say 3 different ways you say what your headline statement is or your value proposition. You can talk about the value add, the expertise and knowledge you offer, your technical skills. So this might be an area where if you're applying for an administration role, you might talk about how you address backlogs of work quickly by developing new skills, by developing new systems and processes that optimize administration operations. This can be where you can demonstrate that you're a problem solver. So you can talk about how you roll out or introduce or build capability in your teams when you're working in the retail sector so that they can manage and anticipate conflict effectively. Basically, again, it's a little bit of a summary taken out of context, so not giving a specific example that demonstrates what you've done. So look at your achievements. Look at what you do really well. Look at what people have said, this is what we come to you for. If you're in an office environment, very often one person or another is the person who is known as the go-to person for this. Do people come to you for a mail merge? Do they come to you, if you're a carpenter, do they come to you for a specific piece of work or to use a specific tool? If you're an engineer, do they come to you for a particular problem that needs to be solved? If you're an electrician, that could be a particular diagnostic piece of work. Whatever it is, think about why people come to you. And then in that 3rd point, you can reference the key requirement for the types of roles you're applying for. This is where you can start referencing the position descriptions. So look at what's common in those PDs and add it to your headline statement. I can guarantee you it makes ATS work particularly well when you do that. Then we go to the next section of your resume. Here's where you can talk about your areas of expertise or your skills and competencies. You don't need both areas, okay? So if you've got significant expertise in a particular area, you know about an occupation, an industry, a sector, or a market, here's where you show it. You have a 1 or a 2-line bullet point that outlines your expertise or your technical skills and lists specific details. So if, for example, it's IT knowledge, you might say high level of proficiency in preparing a range of documents using MS Office and XYZ platforms. If you create databases or you use databases, if you are in accounting and you use MyOb and Xero, this is particularly useful. If you're in IT, you actually keep that whole section separate because you'll have programming languages, networking skills, and a whole range of other information that goes there. If you are in healthcare, this is a great place where you can talk about procedures that you're familiar with. If you are in hospitality, this is a space where you talk about the legislation and the food safety standards that you know about. Use your position descriptions as a point of reference here. This is where that cross-referencing really happens. If you haven't got direct experience, this is where you can talk about what you can do, because you don't have to provide evidence that you've done it before, but you can state that you know about it. So if, for example, you're applying for an OHS representative role, but you haven't actually had that experience before, here's where you can say, applies and interprets relevant or up-to-date OHS legislation and provides advice and support to colleagues. Doesn't say that you've done it before, just says that you can do it or you know how to do it. Same with your skills. Now, the skills, we can put a table in, but again, it would be ideal if we don't. However, trades, graduates, they often use the areas of expertise and the skills and competencies. So in those cases, you might just have 3 areas of expertise, and then you support that with some technical skills. So generally, you might put here leading teams of up to 20. It could be utilizing XYZ machinery. You don't want any more than that singular table. That is the only place you ever use a table. And ideally, I'd prefer it if you don't, but that's put in for people who really, really can't write a full sentence about their skills. Okay. Next is your employment summary. So this is the next section of the resume. You put your date. Ideally, you want month to month and then the relevant year. Be consistent, however. What might look different is if you've had portfolio or contract roles. In that case, you might put down only the months for the contract roles, and if you can't remember the months for your longer term roles, you only put the year. But ideally, stick to one approach and continue with that. I've got some different examples here of what we throw in. When you list your employment experience, you always list it in reverse chronological order, and it usually goes back 10 years. However, if you're pursuing a career change or a role with a company you've worked for or a sector or industry you previously have experience in, you may decide to go back further than the 10 years to ensure you list that particular place of work. So if you're applying to work for BHP and you worked for BHP as a graduate, you actually probably want to make sure you include that information at least in the summary. This provides a really quick reference guide for people who want to quickly review where you've been. And it's also where you can include and reference career gaps. Don't just leave a gap between the dates and assume that you'll address it in an interview. Don't leave space for assumptions because often they can go unfavorably. Instead, show it. And now more than ever, we can feel comfortable doing so. LinkedIn have just rolled out an option to actually put maternity or parental leave on as part of the LinkedIn roles, as the way the roles roll out and the function. And that signifies that finally, firstly, ATS is going to recognize it correctly, and recruiters understand people do take career breaks. It's good to be able to put that in. And as I said, it's where you can then talk about what you've learned in that time. But if you don't reference it at all, you're doing yourself a disservice. So add it in. You'll see second from the bottom, role, company, and then the type of work. If you feel it's pertinent, if it's relevant to the type of work that you do, you can state whether it's a contract or a secondment or a permanent role or a casual role. Do this if you're concerned that it looks like you're moving on from company to company often, okay? When you do that, potentially put whether it's a casual or contract role in italics next to the position. And lastly, that last point, you don't need to add the country. You really only need to add potentially the city or the state to your employment summary after company. However, if you are traveling internationally, or if you have worked internationally, you would add the country as well. And then we move on to our next section, which is about relevant professional experience. This is, after the headline statement, quite possibly the second most important part of your resume. It's the part you should all be familiar with, where you break out your experience into responsibilities and achievements. Now, some recruiters will say that's not necessary. Some resume writers will say that's not necessary. That's something you use judgment to determine whether you break out responsibilities and achievements. At this point in time, it's a good idea to keep your responsibilities short, but still outline them and follow them by your achievement statements. You don't want this section to look like a job description. You're not rehashing your position description. I can't tell you the number of times clients have said, I want you to update my resume. Here's a position description for the role that I'm currently in. That doesn't tell me anywhere near enough. What it tells me is what goes into the responsibilities. So you'd start by describing what you do in the role or what you did in the role. It's where you can provide that detailed explanation, but you don't have to outline every single little thing. Summarize it here, the main points only. Your key responsibilities are essentially a brief position description. The achievements are what's most important. These are statements that explain what you did, how you did it, and what the outcomes were. It's where you can focus on the relevance of your information, the relevance of what you provide in terms of information and how it relates to a particular career goal. So those achievements, they should be broken down into ideally examples that you would potentially provide in an interview. That's a really good way to identify what your achievements might be. You look at your skills, okay? You've written your skills up, your areas of expertise. You've looked at the position descriptions for the types of roles you want to apply for. And then you say to yourself, okay, I need to show that I've used these skills. I need to show that I've done this. I need to show that I can do that by showing a related skill set. And then you look back over your career history. Where have I done something like that before? And that's where you turn these things into achievement statements. Reference them in the responsibilities by all means. But even your responsibilities, show the size and the scope of what you do. If you supervised people, say how many people. If you managed a process, say what type of process. If you manage correspondence as a secretary for a law firm, for example, talk about how many partners you manage correspondence for. What's the volume of correspondence? Give as much scope as you can in the responsibilities, because it provides greater context than what other people will provide. One question that I often get is, how long can these statements be? You don't want them to be any longer than 2 lines, okay? 1 bullet point, 2 lines. You really don't want to go over that as a rule of thumb. If in your achievements, you have to break out what you did, how you did it, and the result, we actually do that in main bullet points and sub bullet points, as you can see here. In the main, we talk about what you achieved and a broad overview of the situation or some meaningful context. It's also where you can write the results. So you might say, what's a good achievement statement? Developed a marketing campaign that improved customer engagement by 20%. If you don't have a quantifiable, don't put it. But if you have a quantifiable of any sort, so a number of any sort, add it wherever you can. So it could be significantly improved customer engagement by approximately 50%. So you can get around not having exact facts and figures that way. Then in the sub-bullet point, you say by, and this was the process. By redeveloping our marketing material to improve, to update it to a contemporary look and feel. It could be by undertaking a complete review of all marketing materials and identifying a need for X, Y, and Z. These are your subpoints. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but this is where you can now tailor the resumes really effectively. You put all of these examples in your master CV, but then when you go to tailor your resume, you pick the bullet points that are most relevant to the roles you're applying for. So you might have 10 achievement statements for a particular role, but you pick the ones that are the 6 or the 8 that are most relevant to the roles you're applying for, and you delete the ones that are less relevant if, and this is only an if, your resume is extending beyond that 3-page mark or that 4-page mark, ideally. This is where you can cut it back. You can also reorder your achievement statements. So if you know that the customer service role that you're going for is one where they talk about, I don't know, maybe they talk about managing customer service remotely, providing remote customer service, working in a call center. And if you've done that or you've got experience in that, use those achievement statements first, anything that's relevant to the particular requirements, and then list out the other ones. So it's not just important what you put in, but the order in which you put it in is important. So you can move those achievement statements around when you create those tailored resumes. The other thing that you can do is if you are applying for let's talk further about that. If you're seeking a promotion, for example, you might want to showcase your leadership skills first. So those achievement statements that are more about how you led, supervised, supported, mentored, assisted, empowered, any of those things that you did for other people, even if you didn't necessarily manage them, but you want to show those leadership attributes, you would put those achievement statements first, followed by the other processes or things that you managed or assisted with or supported or enabled, assisted, etc. If you want to transition into another industry, for example, you might include achievement statements up top that detail your adaptability, your flexibility, your capacity to pick up things on the fly. So you've got that ability to tailor your resumes, not necessarily by rewriting them every time, but by about changing the order in which you present the information and picking what's most relevant. You can also do that with the roles themselves. So because we already have our employment summary, which you'll remember looks like that already shows the chronological breakdown. So when you come to this professional experience where you list your role, which I haven't got here, but you should probably have a subheading with the role directly under relevant professional experience, you don't have to present this in chronological order. You can present this information in order of relevance. So if you're applying for a role with Western Health, you might, and you've worked with Western Health previously, or you've worked with a competitor, but you're currently working for a window manufacturer, you might want to put the role in a healthcare related industry first under relevant professional experience. And you can get away with that because we've said relevant up the top. And this allows you to highlight what's most important to someone who needs to make a hiring decision. Have I covered everything else here? I believe so. Any questions about this section? Because it's probably the most complicated and the most important part of the CV. So if anyone has any, please feel free to ask or keep them for the end of the session. Okay. So what's an achievement statement? As I mentioned before, this is the most important part of your CV. You've got to talk about what you did and how you did it and what the outcome was. Achievements are everything from those tangible results, the ones you can put numbers around, and performance outcomes, KPIs, to process improvements, things that you fixed, problems that you solved. You can also talk about issues that you managed or came across. Sometimes when we all come to this, and I think I might have referenced it in a previous workshop, we often experience situations where we could have made a difference or had a great idea, but it was stonewalled at some point. It didn't fit a policy. There wasn't enough time. There was something else happening that had everyone's attention. You had a particular individual who was a bit of a blocker in your workplace. That often happens. But in your achievement statements, you can say that you suggested a process improvement to assist in ensuring compliance with a particular legislative requirement, for example. So you can talk about suggestions. Suggested a better way to reflect to improve customer experience by changing the merchandising strategy. So changing the way in which you put products around the store, for example. It might not have come to fruition. It might never have happened. But if you don't have enough achievement statements, you can talk about what you suggested, what you came across, what you identified. You might have identified a problem, but not been in a position to fix it. Identifying the problem is still an action that shows a skill that you need in your next role. So you can use that. Even the things you learned, so whether that's formal professional development or informal, things you learned on the job, things you gained exposure to, awareness of, they can all be considered achievement statements. They're all outcomes. They all had value. Moving right along, tickets and licenses and qualifications. So if you're a trade professional or working in fields such as construction, logistics, or engineering, your tickets and licenses might be crucial to your ability to do the work required. So this includes your construction white cards, working at heights, etc. It's really crucial that these are all listed and you also write whether they're current or not. Sometimes an employer will provide you with upskilling in that space, but it's easier for them to do so if you already have the relevant knowledge. They know you'll pick it up really quickly. It's an easy investment for them. So make sure that even if your license in a particular or ticket in a particular area is expired, say that you've got it anyway, or you've had it in the past. Qualifications are fairly straightforward. Write the date, write the qualification, the title of it, and the institution where you got it from. The same applies for any professional development. If you've got tertiary qualifications and you've also done short courses, you can split that up into qualifications and professional development. If you don't have very many of either, you can put them all under qualifications. That's fairly straightforward. Now, committees, boards, and professional memberships. This section demonstrates some of your intangible assets or attributes. This is where you can prove that you're a subject matter expert, or you have a reputation for working with integrity, that you're well respected amongst your peers, where there's a lot of assumptions essentially about your ability to work, your collaborative skills, your willingness to stay up to date with specific requirements relevant to industry, your work ethic. This is all evidenced by any responsibilities that you've had in contributing to committees, to boards, and to industry associations. So make sure that you include that information. Now, conferences and publications is a subsection that is not relevant to everyone. I'm well aware of that. But what I do find with clients is that very often they will have attended conferences but won't put down attendance. They think that you have to be a presenter. That's not necessarily the case. You can showcase your professional development by listing your attendance. So where I've got date, position, organization, you can write the date of the conference and you can write attendee or participant and then the organization or the name of the conference itself and then its organization. But make sure you include it. The same applies with publications. And that can be any publications. It doesn't have to be formal publications relevant to, for example, in healthcare settings, research, academia, teaching. Very often we come across people who publish publications there. But speeches, presentations, blog posts, any references in the media, we often wonder, how can we put that information on our CV? Well, this is the spot. This is where it goes. As I said, it's not relevant to anyone, but if it does ring true for you, make sure it goes on there, please. Then we've got community involvement, which I mentioned previously. Community involvement is quite important because it allows you to showcase the way you work. It's that likability factor that's really important for an employer. It gives them a sense of who and what you are outside of work and outside of even your home life. It shows what's important to you, your values. It's remarkable. And it gets very frustrating as a job seeker to say, oh, I've put in 100 applications in the last 3 months. Nothing's come back. They couldn't care less about my values or my ethics. All they care about is whether or not I can do the job. To an extent, that's true. But they do also recognize, companies at every level do recognize that they're employing human beings now more than ever. And your community involvement is where you can showcase your values, those factors that speak to your character. So it can involve everything from volunteering or participating in local groups, associations, even sports clubs that your kids might belong to. If you've sold raffles, if you have fundraised in any way, shape, or form, even if you didn't organize the fundraising, you can actually put that involvement here because it shows that at least you'll be bothered to pick up the box of chocolates and try and sell them, even if nothing else. Okay. All of this, it demonstrates what your character is. Some of our larger employers, so it really is our very large ones and our very small ones that really care about this section, we find. The larger ones like that you're a well-rounded person and have a sense of social responsibility, because social responsibility often translates into integrity, accountability, and your work ethic. And these are highly regarded qualities in any employee at any level. Obviously, your community involvement is also really great for showing your relevant skills if you are seeking a change in career direction, if you're returning to work after a career break, or if you're first starting out, either in the workplace as a whole, as a graduate or an apprentice, or if you're starting out in this industry. So one of the areas where I can coach clients to build what we call their career capital is if you are looking at securing a change in career direction, or you want to do the same thing in a different industry, it's worthwhile investing some time in some volunteering. And it doesn't have to be a year. It can be 3 weeks. It can be helping out with one single event. But do something that demonstrates your willingness to engage with what that industry is about, anything at all, or the type of work that you'll be doing in that industry. Obviously, this doesn't apply to every occupation, but it does apply to a number of them. Again, administration, customer service, complaints resolution, building communication skills, obviously your design field, so graphic design, marketing. There's a lot of work in that space. There's also a lot of operational things that you can do. You can help out at your local kids athletics carnival, and you can show that you have an understanding of health and safety. These things it's lateral thinking, but it showcases that you have the ability to do what's required in a salaried role without actually being in that salaried role. Also showcases those other skills like adaptability. We also have an IT proficiency section. Now, this is relevant when IT proficiency is a requirement in a position description. I've popped it in down here, but it could go under your skills, or often it goes at the end of the resume because IT proficiency, it's an inherent, we expect you to have it, but sometimes we need you to just spell it out for us. So we can put it at the end of the CV because it's not that important, but it's there if it needs to be. And you can, again, move it according to the relevance of the roles you're applying for. So IT proficiency can refer to software, online platforms, hardware, specific IT skills. Again, think about the role you're targeting and use your judgment to determine how much detail to include here. Consider this: your executive and your experienced job seekers are much less likely to need specific technical skills in comparison to your technical and operational staff. Therefore, you're more likely to move this section further up in order of importance in your CV. You might pop it straight under the skills section. And then we've got additional information. So this is a section that sits at the bottom of your CV, and you pick what's required for you. If you speak a language other than English, list it here and detail how fluent in it you might be, even if it's not required as a part of the job description. You put your visa status, but this is only applicable to migrants. This is really important because a number of people who are here on permanent residency or are here on different types of visas, they find it difficult to apply for roles because the roles say that you have to be a permanent resident or an Australian citizen. That's often because that is a requirement for some organisations and roles, but often that's put there almost as a tick box by HR or by the recruiter. And very often the specifics of your visa situation are different to others, and you might be allowed to work a full-time workload. If that's the case, put the information in. Do not assume that your recruiter or your hiring manager knows this. I speak from professional and personal experience. My own husband, coming over from the UK, had to spell out for a multinational corporation what his visa entitled him to do. Well, I had to spell it out for them. So don't make any assumptions that anyone knows what your visa status is or what it means. Make sure that you put it down here. If you're going to consider relocation, which is particularly relevant if you're applying for a role in another state or country to the address listed on your resume, put it down. Don't make any assumptions. Again, put that down there that you'll consider relocation or that you're in the process of relocating. Then you can reference that in your cover letter as well. Now, interests. This is a bone of contention amongst a number of us practitioners, whether or not we put it in. Put it in your master CV and then use your judgment. That's my best advice at the moment. Some recruiters consider this information irrelevant. A lot of employers tell us that the interests show that you'll be a right fit for their organization. They give you insight into personality. They're also often used as an icebreaker during interviews. I do recommend that if you have an interesting interest, something that's a little bit outside of just reading, cooking, and watching movies, which are the three most common, put that in there. If it's really mundane, just leave your interests out altogether. That's probably your best approach. And then referees. Now, if you don't have any other additional information, your subheading here isn't additional information. It's just referees. But under that, I usually recommend that they should be listed as available on request. Wait wherever possible until you're asked for these details. That allows you to do two things. It allows you to select your referees based on the job or opportunity you're pursuing, and it allows you to brief your referees. So the first point, if one of your potential referees works for the organization you're applying to, you'd want that person to be your primary referee. And that, or it could be someone who speaks to a particular area of your expertise or your experience or your knowledge, and you can put them down as the first of the two or three that you might list. As I said, this gives you an opportunity to brief your referees before they're contacted. So I always recommend that when you do have your referees listed and you've given that information, you want to tell that referee, I've applied for these types of roles. It gives you an opportunity to say, this is the kind of stuff that they're looking for. This was the focus of the interview or the focus of the application. And you might even give a line reminding them why you've done that before. So they want me to, this particular role is about running events of XYZ size. You might remember that I've done this, this, and this when I was working with you at that organization. Or you can simply upload your CV if you feel comfortable sharing it, so that they've got something to look at and refresh their memory. You would be surprised how many referees appreciate that, okay? They can't remember what to say. They babble. They say, oh, they were great, or they were this, or they were that. And then afterwards, they might catch up with you for a coffee. And I was like, oh, God, I wish I told them that about you. Don't leave it to chance. You also want to make sure that you know when your referees are being contacted. So, again, keep them off the CV until that point in time, unless the position description of the job application says list 3 referees. Now, one of the questions that we had previously was, what do you do if you don't want to list your referees because they're where you currently work and you don't want them to know you're job hunting? Or what do you do if you've been out of the workforce? Or the third one is often, what happens if your last role was particularly toxic, you left on bad terms, how do you get around the referee issue there? In all of those situations, think about your referee reads a little bit more broadly. You can use character referees. So ideally, look amongst your circle of friends and look for someone who would normally provide a stat dec, a statutory declaration. If you have someone in a vocational role or someone who can provide a stat dec, so we're talking about teachers, nurses, doctors, accountants, pharmacists, anyone who has some standing, council workers, anyone who has some standing in the community, that's your first pick for a character reference. Someone you've worked with in a volunteer capacity, somewhere who can speak to the type of work that you do and the type of person that you are. Because the first reason for a reference check is the information here valid and true? So make sure that you choose a character reference who can demonstrate that. You can also, if you don't want your employer to know that you're applying for roles, you can choose a trusted colleague, someone who again can say, and you can tell the person who you're applying with, I'm not going to give you my direct manager's details until there's an offer on the table. Coach that in nicer terms, but that's the point here. You don't want to do that, but you can give them a reference who's a colleague who can speak to the validity of the information you've provided. Yes, they did do this. They did it this way. This is the type of person they like to work with. And then offer to provide your direct supervisor as a referee at a later point in the process. The other thing that you consider is if you are a small business person and you're applying for a salaried role, you can use suppliers, vendors, anyone that you've worked with or engaged with as part of the process. So I run my own business. No one can tell you how many clients I've had, how many people I've successfully written resumes for, and how many workshops I've delivered. But I could direct you to one of the organizations I'm affiliated with. So I'm affiliated with Flex Careers. I'm affiliated with a superannuation company. I do work for them. They're not my boss, but they could talk to you about the type of work that I do. I worked with a person recently who managed their own retail store. They ran 3. We ended up using the suppliers that he bought merchandise from as one of his referees. They were able to speak to his knowledge of the industry, the type of person he was to work for, his commercial knowledge, his financial success, etc. So think laterally about your referees in that situation. And I believe that was the last slide. Okay, last but not least, customize your resume. And I've talked about that to the nth degree, but really consider who's the recipient, the person reading the resume, what do they need to know about me, why are they asking for this document, what will convince them that I'm the right fit for this role and opportunity or their organization. Consider the type of organization, the role requirements and the achievements that you can demonstrate. Show them you can do what needs to be done. Order the information in order of relevance. And if it's too long, delete the information that is least important to the roles that you're targeting. You'll probably find over the process of doing that you'll end up with a couple of resumes that look very similar. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to send those ones out for administration roles in large companies, those ones out for customer service roles, those ones out for marketing roles, for example, or whatever the mix of roles are that you're applying for. Apply this relevance principle across all of your information and documentation. And that is about it. I'm happy to take questions. I think if there's any takeaway from this, it really should be, don't expect this to be a simple process, but do create a system that works for you. Get it all down at once and then keep adding to it so it doesn't become this huge thing every time you move. We talked previously about changing roles more frequently as the world of work changes. This is a way that you can manage that and be ready for opportunities. I say that, but the number of people who contact us and say, we need a resume by next week, it's really hard to do that because it actually takes time to put these together. But if you've got something to work from, you can add to it, you can change it and be quick and ready and responsive for those opportunities as they come up.
Definitely being prepared is a real key for sure. Because potentially, you might be in a situation where you've got multiple options available to you, right, and you need to be able to, respond to those. So
absolutely. And also to have something to, if you do come across someone randomly, and it does happen in your personal and your professional circles, that you might want to share your CV with them, you want to have something ready that you can brush up in half an hour and be comfortable sending to them.
Definitely. All right. So if there's hang on, I've got another question. If a company asks for what salary we expect to earn, how do we know what sum to put in, considering we've never had a previous job in this industry or in their industry? Yes. How do you value your own skills, Tanaz?
Okay, that is a challenging one. In the previous 2 workshops, I will have harped on a little bit about research, okay? To be engaged with the type of work you want to do. And that really is applicable no matter what it is and how simple you might think your role is. It's important to know what other people are doing and what's out there. So it's about, again, looking at the industry associations for starters, seeing if they've got salary information. The recruiters often prepare and publish salary reports. Hayes and Hudson do them regularly, and then you've got your executives and Michael Page do them. If you're in, for example, hospitality or retail, there are specialized hospitality and retail recruiters. Contact them and find out what the going rates are. Obviously, you can also look at award rates. That's available on government websites. The other thing that you can do is search for those types of roles online and use your salary bands in the online search function to give you a rough indication of what might be coming up for certain roles. So if you don't want to ask about this particular role, but a competitor has advertised a similar role, you can also contact them. And because you're not likely to be applying with them, ask them, what's the current salary range that you're considering for an applicant or a candidate for this role? So that's another way that you can approach it, is to find out. Always also present a salary band. So never give a specific figure unless you're very confident that that's the only figure you're willing to move for. So this depends on your circumstances. Give them a band and have a little bit of a buffer on either end. It gives you an idea of where you are in the ballpark, and you can say, look, I'm looking at somewhere between 70 and 110. That's a huge band. I'm well aware of that. You can say that. And you can say, look, I would consider different points within this salary band, depending on the situation and the circumstances and the salary packaging or the opportunities available, etc. You can phrase that accordingly. Always consider that there's an opportunity. Everything has an opportunity cost and therefore an opportunity value. So when you look at the role as a whole, also look at what are you going to learn that's going to allow you to take the next step in your career from this role. Equally, data tells us that you're always going to make your biggest amount increase in your salary when you move from role to role and organization to organization. And that's a big change in the last 7 years. Previously, you were far more likely to be promoted internally because you've proven yourself. Now you'll get those internal promotions, but the pay rise is much smaller. So that's something to consider as well. Hope that helps. There's no definitive answer to that.
All right. Thank you very much, Tanaz, and thank you everyone for your attendance. Much appreciated, and lots of luck for the weeks ahead for you to find work.
Thanks, Josephine. Good luck, everyone.